All right, welcome back to Context and Clarity Live. Still haven't worked out a fancy intro yet for the relaunch here of Context and Clarity Live, but glad you're here. Welcome back. This is a new time, a new day, a new look, a new co-host. We said all of this last week as well, but it's been fun to relaunch this and have a new approach to Context and Clarity Live at this point. So, welcome. Glad that you're here, Christian. I see you out there in Ithaca, New York, over on Facebook, and Arturo. I know he's in San Diego. Long time no see. Yeah, Arturo is participating in our master class that we're running this week. Our From Overwhelmed to Optimized master class, which the Arc OS lab for that ended about half an hour ago. So it's been a busy day. Um, but welcome back, Arturo. Mark R. LePage, welcome. Glad you're here. Scott Thrift, welcome from San Francisco, where it's still not raining. That's a good thing. So glad to have all of you here. As you get here, say hi. Let us know that you're here. And also where here is for you as well. If you missed last week, if you don't know this, my new co-host is Katie Kangas. Welcome, Katie. And all the way from Minnesota. Glad
Yes,
you're
I'm
here.
not too far from you in the Midwest.
No, you're not. That's right. We're holding down the middle, right?
Yes.
So right now it looks like we have Christian and Mark. They're over on the East Coast ish, or the eastern half of the country. We've got Arturo on the West Coast. Scott's on the West Coast, and here we are. We're just holding down the middle. It's important. Somebody has to.
The
It's great to
missing
have you.
middle. Yes.
Yeah. We are the missing middle oftentimes, I think, forgotten middle. But I'm glad you're here. Our guest today is sort of in the middle as well. So we're spanning north to south too. So we'll get into that here in just a minute. If you are on Facebook and you're commenting and you say, "Hey, why doesn't my comment show up on the screen like Christian's does or Arturo's is right now?" It's probably because you are in a closed Facebook group, and Facebook has rules. Mark Zuckerberg says that your name, your likeness, your comment can't leave that closed group unless you give specific permission to do that. So right now, on the lower left-hand corner of your screen, there is a URL. I would encourage you to open up a different window here and type into the browser chat.restream.io/FB, like Facebook. That's chat.restream.io/FB. And a couple of clicks later, you'll give Facebook permission to communicate with Restream, which is this platform that we use here for these simulcasts. And a reminder, if you've done this in the past, you say, "Hey, that's not it. I've done that before." The permissions expire at some point. I don't know what the timing is, but they do expire. So just try it again. And a couple of clicks later, it'll solve all of your problems, pretty sure. Every single one of them. It's magic. So check that out. Try that out if you're commenting away from Facebook and they're not showing up on the screen. But great to have all of you here. Christian says he misses our friends in Ghana, Australia, Ireland, and Nicaragua. Yeah, we haven't. I know that the day and time change is, it's a curveball to a lot of people, and we also took a break for several weeks. So I suspect that we will regain our friends, we'll regain our audience, but it's something new to get used to. I'm still not even used to the idea of Tuesday at 2 o'clock instead of Thursday at 4. So we'll get them back. We'll find our friends once again. But it's great to have all of you here with us today. Katie, where in Minnesota are you?
Just north of the Twin Cities. So
All right.
Minneapolis and St. Paul.
Nice. So, how far from Canada is that?
It's still 5 or 6 hours.
Okay,
Um, I have
big
not made
state.
that trek. Yeah, it takes time.
Yeah, yeah. When was that? 2021, I guess. We had a very poorly named get together. It was called Echols, and we were up in northern Vermont, and I'd never been to Vermont before. And Jay Caroli was one of the organizers. Catherine McPhail was one of the organizers. A couple of others, and they found this place called Jay Peak. No relation to Jay Caroli, and it says in northern Vermont. I'm like, okay, northern Vermont. And so get to Jay Peak in northern Vermont, and you could literally see Canada was like right there. It's like, see that tree over there? That's Canada. Like, okay, that's pretty far north. We've almost made it. We've almost escaped at this point. So um,
I think the
good.
accent is closer than the border.
That could be. It could be my son who's in college. His roommate is Canadian, and so I get immersed in that accent every time I go to one of their baseball games. So, uh, a
Yeah.
good to know. Good to know. All right. Well, um, let's make the most of the time that we have with our guest today. He's back there in the green room, waiting patiently. Some of you are going to recognize this face, and you're going to recognize this name because he was our closing keynote speaker for the Entree Architect Community annual meeting back in November in Austin, Texas. So let me introduce him. Our guest today is a CEO and a founder. He's an expert on senior housing and care and on aging in place. He's the author of the best selling Right Place, Right Time, the ultimate guide to choosing a home for the second half of life. He was the closing keynote speaker at TCAM 22 last year in Austin. He's also the founder of here, which maybe we need to explain that. It's like you are here. He's the founder of Here. We'll get into that here momentarily. Ryan Frederick, welcome to Context. I should say welcome back to Context and Clarity Live.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I guess I'm part of the southern part of the middle. Going
You
back
are.
to your dialogue, I'm the Texas representation. So excited to be here in I guess more of its original format of virtual versus in person.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So for those of you that were not able to attend the meeting in Austin, like I said, back in November, the way that was structured was that Ryan gave the closing keynote, which was fantastic, and then we did the quick changeover, set up everything on stage, and Ryan and Catherine and I were sitting there on stage with a live physical audience as well as the live virtual audience on the screen behind us, and that was really cool in a way because we got the live questions and we got the live questions and it was a lot of fun that way. But yes, this is the more traditional model today, and I have no doubt that it's going to be equally as fun a conversation. And what you work on and the way that you approach it fascinates me because understanding that you're not an architect, but you know so much about placemaking and about the effect of placemaking. So one of the things that I really wanted to kind of, I guess, start out with is while many architects are thinking about creating places, I think we think about it in terms of the physical, the experience, probably emotional aspects of it as well. You consider those things, but you actually take it, I would say, even further in the long term effect of place, I guess, in a way. Can you talk a little bit about the way that you think about placemaking?
Yeah, I've perhaps thought too much about it in retrospect. And in fact, it goes a bit to the name of my company, which I think's changed. It has been since I was with you all in November.
It
To
has, yeah.
hear
You
HERE.
alluded to the change, yeah.
Yes, I alluded to the change. And I followed up on that one. So yeah, to just let me double click on that for a second, and then I'll double back on your question. Yeah, because they're related. I think that this impact of where we choose to live and I'd say be present. It's not just our address. Where are we present? It is. I do believe it's a profound has a profound impact on your life, and I think it's one of these things that there's an impact here and now. But there's this longer lasting impact. And what might be perfect for Jeff or perfect for Katie may not be right for Ryan. And it's a very, there's unique dimensions to it at the individual level. And there's also unique elements of the time. I did a talk yesterday in Orlando. I was sharing earlier before we started this, and I talked about a story of when I lived in San Francisco. So my first job, I studied engineering in college, electrical engineering. Thought I'd be in technology for a long time. Wasn't. We'll get to that in a second. But I was in San Francisco during the heydays of the .com craziness, and I was worked for an investment bank for a year, and then got recruited to work for a group we invested in a software company. And we went public within a year, and it was crazy. I was like, oh my God, this business thing's pretty easy. It's not actually, but it felt like that at the time. Then we had a scandal in our company. Some people went to jail. I had a dose of reality therapy. But there was a window there for a while, actually, when I was in San Francisco. I was single, then dating my later become my wife, my good buddies. I commuted to basically to work via bicycle. And it was an awesome time for me and San Francisco. And then fast forward, call about 20 years later, or 15, depending on when I kind of left and so on. And it's a different circumstance. I've got 3 teenage hooligans, and I've got, different demands on my time. And so my apartment that I shared with 3 other roommates and later with one roommate wouldn't work quite as well. That place wouldn't port over well. My wife wouldn't accept that, I don't think. Uh, but then also San Francisco's changed. I remember I'm not a big shopper. I'd go clothes shopping one time a year, and it would be to the Nordstroms downtown. They have an anniversary sale every July. Well, based on some recent announcements, I don't think that Nordstrom's will be open this July. It's among stores they've decided to close in the San Francisco area. And so you've got this dynamic where just finding your right place, it has a big impact, which I'll come back to in a second. But it's so unique. It's unique to your needs and preferences, and what the options are out there, and then that moment in time. Back to the place thing. Yeah, I think it is. It is so profound, and I think when you look at the research around healthy longevity, the good news is so much of it actually is in our control. So just because your parents lived for a long time, generally speaking, that isn't necessarily a strong indicator that you will live for a long time. But more importantly, it's not just how long you live, it's the quality of the life that you have. Uh, the phrase I've used recently is longevity is a gift, healthy longevity is earned. And the premise behind that is a lot of the boost in longevity that we've gotten over the last century is a consequence of advances in healthcare, technology. Just it's a bit of where the era we were born into. But healthy longevity, where we are healthy for a long duration of that, where we're financially secure, where we have purpose and we're socially connected, uh, more of that's kind of up to us to sort out, and then as architects to be mindful of that for our clients. In what ways can we create places that make it easier for people to thrive over this longer life? And in some respects, I see it as really as the key to healthy longevity, and that is place. Yet it's hidden in plain sight. We focus on, God, eat my broccoli, and I got to go exercise. Not important things. Don't get me wrong, but if you get place right, a lot of those things just happen easier. It's like in the water. And particularly the social connection piece, which I want to spend some time talking about today as well.
Yeah, I think we've got a little bit. Some of us have a little bit of an advantage because we talked about this a little bit in November. But as I mentioned earlier, you have a book, best-selling book. It's called Right Place, Right Time, and it talks about choosing that place. And I know I know a lot of what we talked about and what you just, there you go.
Yeah.
That is the well-trained author right there. He's got
Yeah.
it.
Well, normally I don't have to roll to get it, but
Yeah.
this was a little outside of my arm's length.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, that's it's good. Um, the so much of what you're talking about in choosing that place, like you just alluded to, those social connections. Um, I'm thinking about where I am right now. I live in an historic neighborhood, exactly 5 miles from the center of Indianapolis. As I sit here right now, if I could get high enough to see over the trees, I'd be staring right at the skyscrapers downtown, and very walkable community. I get up every morning, I walk. I didn't want to be a walker, so my excuse is I walk over and get my espresso at the coffee shop every
Mhm.
morning and walk home. Um, there are a lot of things that we can do in this neighborhood on foot, and the social connections, like you alluded to, the front porches. This is one of those front porch kind of neighborhoods. Everybody has their dogs that they walk, etc. Um, versus, if I were to drive, Indianapolis is not a huge city. If I were to drive, say, 20 minutes or so east of here, I get into suburban sprawl. I get into, in my opinion, disconnectedness.
Yeah.
That's and not to be judgmental, right? Because what's right for me is not what's right for people living out there. Um, there are big differences in those places, and I hear you when you say social connection, because that's what this neighborhood is about, right? It's about social connections.
A couple things on that. I would say that part of what I advocate is getting this higher on people's radar screens. That individually, are we being as thoughtful as we can be around the elements that are important to us, and how are they embedded in the places that we frequent, that we are rooted in. Uh, and to your point earlier, you don't want to be judgmental, but it's possible that there are some people that are living further away that could afford to be in a more walkable area, that could basically um, that basically could also they they could benefit from the social connection, and it's possible they just haven't put the thought to understand the difference. And I think that part of the dynamic that's happening right now, and this is why I think it's so important for this community to be aware of it individually and then also as professionals, is that more and more our society is being designed, wired for disconnection. So I'll give you some examples. I do blog every other week on the here.life website. There's a mailing list people can sign up for, and there's an assessment tool there that thousands of people have taken just to say, is this the right place for me? And I then offer some advice about it. I do want to come back to some courses I'm doing in a second. I'll come back to that before we're done. But a recent blog was really talking about this experience going to a Whole Foods here in Austin, where drove into the garage, I got my parking ticket, I parked my car, I went up the stairs, grabbed my shopping cart, went a few different aisles, loaded some stuff into my shopping cart, got in the self-checkout line, zapped a few things, put my credit card in, grabbed my bags in my cart, got my ticket uh, uh, certified so I could get, so I could leave for free, and went down, loaded my bags from my shopping cart into my car, got in my car, drove out, got my, gave the machine my parking ticket. I didn't talk to anyone. In fact, had I tried, I probably didn't have to make eye contact with anyone. About a month later, I was visiting a friend in Cincinnati. Cincinnati's the headquarters of Kroger. Kroger took it a step further. This was a larger Kroger store. There were about 12 checkout stands open. They were all the self-checkout. They didn't offer an in-person option. In fact, they're relying so heavily on this that they have built in this store 2 of them that offer the feature of a conveyor belt. So when we went in and we had our bags. Now this is a bigger shopping cart. We were shopping for a larger party. So we take our produce and our bags and our cans, and we're zapping them, and we put them on the conveyor belt, and then goes to the end, and then we pay our credit card, and then we walk down to the end of the conveyor belt, and then we get the opportunity to bag all of our mound then of groceries. We put them in our bags, pop in the grocery cart, go out to our car. Now, we had some entertainment with this because it was the 2 of us. That's a good friend. I hadn't seen him in a while. But imagine if you're single and there's some level of loneliness, which, by the way, there was an op-ed piece in New York Times about a week ago from the current U.S. Surgeon General. He said 1 in 2 people in the U.S. in any given moment have some measurable level of loneliness. It's like super pervasive now. But imagine you're single, you live alone, your big excursion for the day is to go to the grocery store, and you go to the grocery store, and in your experience there, you don't talk to anyone, and you go through the conveyor belt experience I just said. How does that make you feel about humanity? And my guess is you're probably not feeling great. And there was I'm not going to put this on the architects. This is, a different deal. But the more and more that we're wired to, or that our society is designed for disconnection, I would say it makes your neighborhood, like you're talking about, Jeff, all the more important, where you have a front porch, where there's opportunities for easy engagement, where you're in a culture around you where it's common to say hi. I mean, even places where people walk, more and more people have their earbuds in, and you feel like you're disrupting them, even to say hi. So we're in a spot now, and this is even before we talk about artificial intelligence, before we talk about, the younger generation, the digital natives that have been raised without some of the social kind of niceties, perhaps, that older generations were raised on. The cultural norms have changed. And so I believe people have agency to say this is important, and that's part of what I encourage. And part of that is in the decision of where to live. But there's also an element of can there be more of a narrative? Can we talk more about this? Can there be more examples of where architects and other professionals have spoken out, influenced the developers they work with? And I say this not to be alarmist, but I just think it matters. It's not just having relationships with your good friends. This idea of knowing, like, your grocer checkout person that works there, their name, it makes you feel like you have a greater sense of belonging in your community. There's a recent study on belonging, where a national one, where it showed that only 26% of people in the U.S. have a sense of belonging in their local communities. They feel an aggregate a greater sense of belonging to their country and we know all the political strife in that level, but here in the, this is your neighbors and so on. So it really matters. And then when you look at the research around the health narratives, there's a number of things that point to this, but I'll raise one, and that is there's a study out of Harvard, a longevity study, recently, the basis of a book called The Good Life. And what they found basically was that of all the different, it's a fascinating study. What they did it 600 people in 300 that were a Harvard undergraduate class, that then was complemented by another 400 at-risk youth in the Boston area, going back, I say, 80 years ago. So this was JFK's class at Harvard. They pulled them together. They've watched them over these many decades. They've watched them, their spouses, their kids, their kids' kids. They followed them around the country as well. Life unfolded. People fill out a survey every year. about their health. They get records from their physicians every 5 years. They sit down with them for an in-depth interview and do a separate health check. And what they found was it was the nature, it was your relationships, the strength of the relationships that stood out among every other variable. In fact, they said the health of your relationships in your 50s was the strongest indicator of your health more broadly in your 80s. So this stuff matters, and I think we have to recognize the moment that we're in and the ways in which there's headwinds that that are impacting us.
I think,
that's go ahead, Katie.
yeah, it's impressive the intersectionality of research that you're doing and addressing in this book. And I think that's like next level writing. You can't just write about researching a topic. You write about how you're processing, how they are it's so complex, especially when you're talking about people. I just wanted to list real fast those 5 categories just because I
Yeah.
love lists.
Yeah.
You're
Go
talking
for it.
place,
Yeah.
purpose, social connection, physical well-being, and financial well-being. And that seemed so comprehensive. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention as we're going into this, that you've thought and researched each of these components as you've done this book.
Yeah, that's right. And I really got that framework of those 5 different elements through some work that Gallup Healthways had done with their well-being index. But to your point, there's an opportunity to double click or triple click each of those areas. Part of this work is inspired by the blue zones. And the blues, which is really that concept, has been around for about 20 years. Dan Buettner and some of his colleagues from National Geographic, they traveled the world and they identified 5 areas where people had lived the longest and healthiest. Places like Costa Rica, Japan, an area in Italy, area in Greece, and then actually a spot in Southern California. And in that work, they were able to observe. But what's changed over that time, or certainly been augmented, is there's been a lot more research on these different elements, like you describe, of purpose, of social connection, and so on their own merits. And while it may be fun to imagine moving full time to Italy or Greece, for example, as a practical matter, most of us, the opportunity really is to create our own blue zone closer to where we live or somewhere in the US. And I think in that sense, yeah, the research is helpful to look at. And to your point earlier, Jeff, we have agency. Like that's part of what makes I think America a special place, is you're not generally mandated to do that many things, but we can hear the things that the research seems to indicate, and you have an opportunity within certain measures to lean into that or not. Going back to this longevity versus healthy longevity, I think one of the outcomes of this is if we make a set of different decisions that makes it such that our quality of life is impacted, we may not like feel that today as much as we may feel that down the road, where we're in a position where we have more compromised quality of life, whether it's our health, whether it's our financial resources, that even if we're living longer, it isn't necessarily living better. And so I do hope and I think there is, at least in some circles, a movement around, okay, how do we make this longevity thing a healthy longevity? They say today half of the kids born in the US are expected to live to 100. So and we only have seen different stats, but generally speaking, it's sub 4% of the housing stock in the entire US has been designed for people with just some mobility issues. So it's like we thought when the suburbs were built out that we're car dependent, like we're mentioning, that I guess we also thought that people would never age, and there'd be no health compromises along the way. So this is an important time to think differently and recreate and work in partnership with business clients, but also residential and individual clients too.
So when we think about, obviously we've got an audience of I'm going to assume mainly architects today, um, many of whom are designing residential projects. Maybe it's one-off, maybe it's a development, maybe it's a multifamily or mixed-use project. But when we're talking to an audience like this, what's your message to the architects in terms of how they can impact these things that you're talking about? Obviously, they're working with clients. Um, they that's their lifeblood, right? If a
Right.
client hires me, I've got to design, to their program, et cetera. But what can architects control, short of also being a developer, I suppose? But what can architects control that has um, where they can have the maximum impact in this larger equation that you're talking about?
Well, I think they can have a lot of impact, Jeff. I think that I mentioned this, I believe, when we were together in November, and that is um, one of the first opportunities is to ask a client, and I'm sure people do this already. So I'm probably a little bit rudimentary on this, but that is to say, we can talk about what your goals are for the physical product, but can we take a step back for a second, just for a moment? Like, what are your life goals here related to this home? Like, what do you imagine the uses? How do you want to celebrate in this house? Like, what help us understand the ways in which you might want this home to be a hub for activity. What are the type of people you want to host? To the extent that you can link your home to some broader life goals, it can then inform the architect around clever ideas that the homeowner may not necessarily be thinking about on the front end. It may not be reflected in Architect Digest and so on, because I'd say one of the tragedies in all this is when people go through the effort of a rebuild, a remodel, and they make some decisions around the design that then forces them to perhaps change their place earlier than they needed to, or it becomes less accommodating when they have people that are staying with them that could benefit from these things. And by the way, a lot of these designs around universal design, ageless design, it does not mean that it's a compromise on the look and feel of what you're doing. They don't have to have there aren't necessarily compromises in these things. You can do it in an aesthetically like pleasing way that just works. Plenty of examples. So I would say, if you can start off, like I think I saw Jessica here in the Facebook message, like, yeah, what harm is it by asking that question? Like, how does this fit into your life goals? And I think that's pretty harmless and give you a lot of power, and also be seen as something more than just an architect. You're like, actually, they're trying to help me with my life more broadly. Not saying you should go to life coaching, but what it does do is, at a minimum, how allows you to see the bigger picture and then solve for some of that. And to the extent you start to have some stories where people are thoughtful about creating some measure of, say, ageless design to accommodate like broader life goals, like, hey, I want this to be something like my forever house. Well, then you have case studies, examples, you can share, you can write about, share, talk with prospective clients. So I think that's a key thing. Now and this came up in November. You don't want to talk yourself out of a client. That said, there may be situations where a client might try to be modifying, say, an existing house. So I know we're focusing a bit on individual kind of residential experiences, but they're saying we want to stay in this house, we want to make some changes, but it might be that place that they're in is it's the wrong one. Like, they may not know their neighbors, they may not be socially connected. There may be other things that make that physical house in its composite just not the right place for them at that point. And I'm not suggesting that you talk yourself out of a client. However, it might be that the better opportunity is to find property elsewhere or a different house that you can remodel for different reasons. And this is why my hope is that as more people think more deeply about place and its central role in healthy longevity, is allows a broader set of like creative options to make sure that you're solving for, the best place for you at that given time. So that's why I start. I mentioned I have this assessment on the Here website, here.life. You'll see it there, but it's here.life/assessment. And in some cases, that actually might be an interesting tool for architects if they're working with a client where they just know place is on their mind. This can be it's a 2-minute assessment, just helps people understand where they are, and they may decide with a little more reflection kind of where they are, and that may be more informative for you as you then try to find the right situation for them.
So if you're listening to this or you don't see the screen right now, or maybe do see the screen, there is a URL that Ryan just mentioned, here.life. That's the actual URL.
Yeah.
There is a .life extension now. So here.life is the website. So here.life/assessment will lead you to the assessment, obviously, that Ryan is referring to. And you mentioned not talking yourself out of a client, which, fair point. But as the guy that gets to put on sort of the management consulting hat or the business of architecture hat a lot, I would argue that, and you actually mentioned this earlier, that actually taking that approach and saying, hey, maybe this isn't the right house. Maybe we need to look at a different place for connectivity reasons or whatever those are. I think that's a big value add for architects. And I know there are architects out there, they'll say, well, that's not what architects do. And I say, why not? Why not do that?
Yeah, there's, of course, Taylor Davis, who's part of your community from TPD Architects, and she's built a practice around this area, particularly I'd say on the aging in place side. It's very thoughtful, in the Alabama market, Birmingham in particular. But I think that they're going back to our social connectedness conversation we had moments ago. As we all know, there are a lot of boomers, millions and millions of boomers, and many of them, it's complicated to figure out what to do. And so if they're able to get not just an architect, but someone who's thoughtful about how to plan for a longer life, yes, please. And when you figure also how many people there are, as I said, a bit socially disconnected in certain circles, single, whatever, like there's a lot of value in being able to like slow things down for just a moment. What are you really solving for? And I could imagine it not just leads to better outcomes over the long haul, but got to be some reputational gains too, where, this is because it's hard to get good advice on how to think about these things. So yeah, everyone has to manage their practice in the best way for them, but I do think there's just enormous opportunity in pretty much every locale with people aging, looking for alternatives, not interested in senior housing or not interested in senior housing yet. When you look at the gains in longevity, generally speaking, it's not people living another 5 years in skilled nursing. It's people generally having another 5 healthy years, for example. And so what do you want? This narrative of you get educated, you work, and then you retire, like that narrative, we're in the midst of blowing that up. Because if all we're doing is adding extra years to retirement that for most people may not have the purpose they're looking for, they may not be financially able, particularly in a post-pension world, it's different. You're coming in and out of different pursuits. And that may mean you have different physical places are part of it. And one thing we haven't talked about as much, but I want to mention is this idea of, metaphorically, what's your place? For every stage in life, are you with your people? Are you doing the things that you want to go do? That is so important, because if you don't have a sense of those things, you may be, choosing the wrong physical place as well. you may be solving for the wrong level, I guess I could say. You might say, okay, I got to make my house a little bit better now for this stage in life. But in practice, it may be that the real issue is you got to find a new purpose because you're a different stage, and you got to go find your people, and that may not be right there. So there's the little piece of finding your place, and there's also the figurative here, which becomes Mark Twain had a number of famous quotes, but one of them is the two most important days of your life are the day you were born, which I agree with, and then the day you find out why. And he was born in the 1800s. Life expectancy was sub 50 when he was born. And I think in the world that we have now, where people are living longer, I don't think it's just one why. I think you have multiple whys, and each why comes with it this check. Okay, am I with my people? Am I in the right place physically? It has a bunch of things tied to it. So it might be that maybe there's a stage where you're looking more after your kids, but maybe there's a stage where you're looking after older family, or all sorts of different stages of those whys.
And I'm curious if you know about the term life cycle housing.
I'm familiar with it, but not terribly.
That's it. It's new to me too. It's something that economic developers kind of talk about when thinking about a community. I'm part of a group that goes into rural Minnesota communities to talk with them, and often housing is the biggest problem, the lack of it. But they will often talk about the type of housing that you build, and not just building apartment complexes, because that doesn't meet the needs, and thinking more completely.
That's a great point. So this probably ties a bit into something we talked about briefly in November, and that was around going back to this missing middle we talked about earlier. It's the missing middle housing. So you've got a number of markets. You either have the single family housing, and then you got the apartments, to your point, Katie. But in practice, and I talk about this a bit in the book, you've got duplexes and triplexes and townhomes, and there's this bigger, middle housing option. Even ADUs, I would say, kind of fit into some of that, the accessible dwelling units. So the more that municipalities, and I've been doing some more speaking for municipalities, I hope to do more around this, because if municipalities can understand this, if they can appreciate that having a broader range of housing, and I'll call it like attainable housing, that's designed for people such that works over a longer period of one's life, it allows people that are from that community to stay there in better kind of non-institutional housing. And when you have there's a trade-off oftentimes of the amount of square footage and then lot size, which allows some levels of density, not necessarily on top of each other the way apartments are, but you have enough space that people might prefer, but enough density that allows for these spontaneous levels of interactions. We're missing that in a lot of our areas. The rural areas are an interesting opportunity, because there might be more to play with there than fully built out urban areas. And actually, this story might resonate most strongly in the Midwest, in the middle parts of the country. And in fact, I have not spent much time in Indianapolis, but I know there's, thinking about where you are, Jeff. I know, how far away are you from Carmel?
So Carmel, Indiana is 20 minutes north of me.
Okay.
Northwest of me. Yep.
Because I've heard some good stories.
They're suburban.
Yep. Yeah, of Carmel, where it is suburban, but it has some design intentions to make at least some of it a bit easier for people to get to know each other. So there's some sneaky good areas in the Midwest. I talk about that a little bit in my book. I think it's overlooked. It over indexes for friendliness. There are some interesting places where people have made these places home, where we can go in and get to know people, and the price point could be more reasonable than some other places. And you're also seeing some interesting redevelopment.
As you're saying that, I was thinking about one of my sisters went to Berry College in Rome, Georgia, tiny little school up in the mountains of Northwest Georgia. And one of the things that I've learned since she graduated um, is that at Berry, when she was there, they had, like a lot of places have, they had sort of a thriving daycare uh, facility. So, like local, people from Rome, from Georgia, they could take their kids to the daycare there. Employees of the college could take their kids there, and so you've got this interaction between kids and college students. Well, now at Berry, they have also built senior housing on campus. And so you've got dormitories for college students, you've got the young kids, and then you've got seniors there, and they're looking at that strictly from the point of view of the intergenerational interaction, which I've not been up there on campus, I guess, probably
Mhm.
since she graduated, which was, she's not as old as I am, but it was a long time ago still. Um, but I think that's fascinating, and it would seem to be incredibly healthy for everybody involved to have that intergenerational intersection there.
Yeah, there's a lot of research on that as well, and how it's good for the young and the old. And a lot of our society today, we're segregated by age, and so then younger people don't get to see, have meaningful interactions with, understand, people that are in different life stages. Then there's wisdom that can't be passed down as easily as well. Now, from practical perspective, a number of these colleges, they're struggling because they've got, some of them anyway, some elements of decreasing enrollment. They've got aging physical plant issues. They've got the same labor challenges that we face, broadly. They've got tuition levels that are exceedingly high for a lot of families. So especially those that don't have large endowments, they need to find a way to pivot to be more relevant long term. And so this could be a good, housing use to have other generations, and also ones that are interested, in lifelong learning. So I think it's interesting. There have been high profile projects across the country. I think you're starting to see it pop up around some smaller, universities and colleges as well. Be interesting to see how that evolves. One of the benefits, when you describe some of these, communal areas that work for people who are not college age, they think back to their college experience. Like, wow, how great was it to have people so close by? And I think about my friends from college, and it wasn't, I like to think I learned some stuff in college, although not my grades don't necessarily always support that, thesis. But I did. It was the 2 a.m. conversations. We just had our 25th, college reunion, and a bunch of people came back for it, and then I went to Princeton and they went to the Sweet 16 this year. So we had a spontaneous Sweet 16 gathering in Louisville, Kentucky, among people. There was one point, there were about a handful of us, and our fondest memories were inventing a game we called Happy Fun Ball in our freshman dorm in a narrow hallway. I can't remember what the rules are now, but we had some ball. We tried to tag each other, and we did this endless hours, and we didn't have a phone distracting us. Apparently homework didn't distract us either, but it created these bonding experiences. And when you're in spots where you're in your own kind of capsule, separate and apart from people, happy fun ball doesn't happen. So I think that the more that, we can create places that people are drawn to, not feel like they're forced to go to. Like that's an important part of the mindset. Working with I have a consulting practice, is part of what I spend my time on. Is I'm working with a developer in the Southeast, and we're building, cottages. These are going to be age restricted cottages, but we're building them in clusters where you have a shared green space, you have front porches, where, the expectation is that you just make it easier to get to know your neighbor. You're not required, but we'll make it easier. And the hope is we're going to self-select for people that, that kind of want something like this. There's an article I saw today, Margaritaville, the developer there, locations in Florida, and In South Carolina, they have pretty robust development plans. In a market today where housing developers are, how's the math work, and taking a step back, putting a pause, they're hitting the accelerator because they see that there are people looking for community, and their parrot heads and some others too. It may not be the right place for any of us, but for some it is. And it's less about the design's important, but it's more about how all these things fit together. Now, that's not intergenerational, but I think there's ways we can get placemaking that inspires people that can also have that intergenerational component.
So true. I think this resonates for many reasons with me personally, trying to recreate my own childhood in a small town and having my grandparents both in town and able to help. And now I'm outside of a big city and grandparents are here, grandmothers are here, but it's half hour, 45 minutes away. And
Yeah.
so it's a pseudo recreation of it, but it misses. So, yes, I am on this path trying to figure this out. So, really resonates on a personal level what we're kind of talking about, where the power of a lot of this thinking seems to be at a policy level, but so many of us are like in the middle
Yeah.
in our profession. So what can you leave us with to, like, this is so much to unpack. Where can we like start to percolate this into our practice?
Well, I'd say play the long, Katie, play the long game. And the long game is these issues we're talking about around social connection, around healthy longevity. They're not going away. If anything, they're going to become more and more relevant with each passing year. And so to be to be schooled on this, uh, in fact, to talk about that for just a second, since we were together in November, I've now created a beta workshop of the book and related content in person. Actually, some real estate brokers have hosted it. Some wealth advisors brought their clients. So 2 that were in person, 1 that was virtual, and they went really well. People like, oh my gosh, there's so much here. I didn't realize all the different dimensions, how important it is. And that led me now to launch a beta course. So we've got about a dozen people from across the country, 4 different sessions with the expectation of getting to a plan. Okay, here's my plan of next 3 to 5 years. So I think, yes, play the long game. There could be a path where there's even just some education. How can I get a little bit smarter on this beyond just a context and clarity live event or a book? How can I contextualize this for my work, our work, so that I'm more confident understanding what matters and how to then relay that to my clients? So I would say that's probably the near term. I think it doesn't hurt, Katie, to be part of some of those local conversations, in your local municipalities, to be reading things that are in this area, for where you are. It would be great if the architecture community was more of a voice that made it easier for a wider range of zoning possibilities. So we weren't stuck with just apartments or a single family house, that there were more options. And those are, I would say, take a moment to see how it applies to your life and your journey, like you just described. Play the long game. Understand that this is going to become, whether you want it or not, it's going to become more and more part of your practice, because you're simply going to run into more people where this is on their radar screen and they're going to need help sorting it out. And then consider taking a deeper step of what would it look like to be armed with a bit more information, customized as an architect, to then be able to, have those conversations.
One thing, and I know I'm in the danger zone here because we're like 4 minutes from the top of the hour here. But one thing I would add to that, you mentioned Carmel, Indiana, and I kind of chuckle a little bit because some of those projects that you're talking about, I worked on in a past life.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for a firm where we would have called it traditional neighborhood design. And Katie, if you look at the Congress for the New Urbanism, so this new urbanist traditional neighborhood design, we studied all of those things, and we would design these new neighborhoods and things. And what always seemed ironic to me, this would have been in the the timeline on that would have been early 2000s, I guess. Is that right? Well, no, 2005-ish or so, in that time frame. And what always seemed ironic to me was, and I've lived in this house where I am in this historic neighborhood where I am for 28 years now. I recently needed to ask my daughter, where she wants to live, and I'll just leave the story there. And she immediately started looking for places in this neighborhood. It's the only place she's ever known, but there's a reason that she loves the neighborhood: the walkability, the people knowing your name when you go to the restaurant over here or the coffee shop, etc. And to me, the irony in looking at new urbanism, traditional neighborhood design, was what we were doing was essentially recreating this neighborhood that where I live now. And
Yep.
the home I live in is about 90 years old. It's
Yep.
one of the youngest houses in this neighborhood. Um, and to your point, Ryan, this idea that this isn't going away, absolutely right. I mean, the house, however you want to look at it, the per square foot housing value in this neighborhood is extremely high
Yep.
versus, some new construction out further east of here. Um, and there are big reasons for that. But I think everything that you're talking about, Ryan, and I mentioned this, Katie, because I know you're focused on historic, right? What lessons can you learn from historic design, planning, et cetera, that are completely relevant today, if not more relevant today than they have been for the past 50, 60, 70 years? And relevance is, in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. But I think this conversation is eternally fascinating to me for all of these reasons, and I hope that everybody that's either watching this live or will listen to this in the podcast version, here when it gets published in a couple of weeks, I hope that you'll think further into what we're talking about here in terms of place, in terms of the research. Of course, Ryan's book, as I mentioned at the in the introduction, is called "Right Place, Right Time: The Ultimate Guide to Choosing a Home for the Second Half of Life." If you were with us in Austin last year, Ryan was our closing keynote speaker. You could go to here.life/assessment, which is up on the screen now, to take the assessment related to the book, and I encourage you to do that. But go to here.life, connect with Ryan, and learn more about the way that Ryan researches, writes about, and talks about placemaking and the importance of place, the intersection between place and healthy longevity. There's a real key there.
Yeah.
And this, I would love for this conversation to go on for a few more hours, but we can't do it. So
Yeah. Thanks
thank
so
you.
much. One quick idea that came up, going back to Katie's question about what do I do right now? And that is, one practical thing, and you triggered it in what you said earlier, Jeff. There are a bunch of these older neighborhoods in cities. And when I visit my friend in Cincinnati, I can't remember the name of it. I want to say Hyde Park, but I don't know if that's what it was. But nonetheless, a lot of these houses they're not designed well for people as they get older. So
Right.
if there was a way you go in as an architect, maybe partner with a developer and find a way to make a number of these houses age friendly, but still in these places, I think that's a pretty interesting. I think it's a pretty interesting business because a number of people don't want to tear down these old homes, but it's complicated. But if you get it right, it's so desirable because the supply is so limited.
Yeah.
And
That's an excellent point.
yeah, so just another kind of closing thought. But great to be with you both, and love your community, and I think there's so much potential for impact.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation. And Katie, thanks for co-hosting it again with me this week. Just a heads up to everybody that coming next week on Context and Clarity Live, we will have Charisse Lakeside. Many of you are very familiar with Charisse. She has a great following on Twitter. She is a specifications writer. She is a lot of things in the architecture world, but she is the host of RCAT. You're familiar with RCAT. Their official podcast is called Detailed, And Charisse is the host of that podcast. It's going to be great to get sort of an inside baseball view of that podcast. It is a very popular podcast, and the audience there is growing very, very quickly. So Charisse is a lot of fun. She's going to be a great conversation as well. So join us next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern for our Context and Clarity Live conversation with Charisse Lakeside. So with that, again, thank you. I'm going to use the same closing that we used to use because I think it's still very, very relevant here. Please be safe, stay well, keep those around you safe and well. Take a little bit of time to breathe, relax, find some way to rejuvenate. We don't do this every day anymore, but I think all of those things are exceptionally important to you and your life and your longevity. So please do that, and we will see you again next week. Thanks, everybody.